Good morning. Welcome to the fourth week of our fall series. To bring you up to speed, if you've missed any of these last few weeks, that as human beings, we have the ability to respond to the events that happen to us. And how we choose to do it, how we choose to respond, determines in large part the course and the quality of our lives. It's up to us to take responsibility, to acknowledge the gifts that God has given to us. So over the last few weeks, we've looked at responding to God through prayer. And we looked at how we respond to God when it feels like God is silent to our prayers or that our prayers aren't working. That's precisely when we need to persevere in prayer. And we looked at how to be more effective at prayer. We learned that our prayer is not based on our performance, but on our heart. This week we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about our responsibility with our money. That God puts money in our hands. We're stewards of it. How we respond to the money He gives us greatly impacts our faith. Yes, believe it or not, money is a spiritual issue. Money and possessions placed in our hands don't really belong to us. They belong to God. We're really God's money managers. Put that on your resume. That if you need proof that your money is not your own, consider that there was a time when you didn't own or have any money or possessions, and there will be a time in the future when we no longer have either money or possessions. Eventually, our money is going to go to someone else. We really don't own it. So how we use the money that God has placed in our hands greatly affects our soul and our relationship with Him. Either we'll use our money and possessions to grow in love for God and others, or the money and possessions will corrupt our heart and our soul. We use them, or they use us. In the gospel, we heard about a man who illustrated this point. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through, and there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector and very rich. So Jesus is on a journey, on a trip to Jerusalem, and was passing through Jericho, which is about 20 miles from Jerusalem. If you were here last week, you remember we described tax collectors as the most despised people in the community. They were Jews who worked for the Romans to collect taxes and then took a share of it themselves. That apparently Zacchaeus took full advantage of this arrangement because he wasn't just a tax collector, he was the chief tax collector. He was the boss. And Zacchaeus sought to see who Jesus was, but could not on account of the crowd because he was small of stature. So he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for Jesus was to pass by that way. Zacchaeus is out there on the edge of the crowd. He didn't have any place in the circle of the community, that his greed left him all alone. The approach of Jesus awakens something within him. He runs out ahead of the crowd and does something very unexpected from someone of his social stature. He climbs a tree. It's a spiritual exercise because he's seeking Christ in the process. It's also symbolic because this man, up until this point, is pursuing worldly things. And now, in a sense, he's reaching up to higher pursuits. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. Zacchaeus just wanted a glimpse of Jesus, but Jesus asks to come and stay at his house. This was the personality of Jesus. People who were nothing like him liked him. They were drawn to him. So as a church community, we should reflect the attractiveness of Jesus so that people who are far from God feel comfortable about getting a little closer to him. And when the crowd saw this, they all murmured, "He has gone to the house of a sinner." This shows us how much of a loner Zacchaeus had become and how much the crowd following Jesus didn't get it. Jesus and Zacchaeus spent some time together. How much time? Don't know. What did they discuss? It doesn't say. Luke only tells us that they dined together and enjoyed a conversation. And as a result, Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, "Behold, half of my goods I will give to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I'll restore it fourfold." The conversation leads to conversion. Zacchaeus has a total change of heart and forms a plan for a total change of life. Today, salvation has come to this house, since he's also a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save what was lost. Salvation means that God rescued Zacchaeus from the prison and isolation of greed and gave him a new lease on life. That's what God does for us in our lives. Zacchaeus' sin was most likely greed. He loved money, loved it to a point that he allowed it to master him and destroy his relationships. We can't live in our consumer culture and not feel the pull and the tug of greed. It's impossible. And what makes this problem an especially difficult problem is that it's so hard for us to see greed in the mirror. When we can identify and overcome greed in our lives, we make a huge breakthrough in our relationship with God and with others. Some of us may struggle with greed when it comes to our possessions. No one wants to borrow anything from us because they don't want to put up with the anxiety of having to bring it back in pristine, perfect condition, because they know you'll notice. For some of us, friends and family don't want to come to our house because they can't feel comfortable there, because we're so worried about our stuff and what might happen to our stuff while they're there. Or sometimes our families may feel like our possessions have a place in our heart above them. For some, we simply need to start giving to the poor like Zacchaeus. God has called us to release some of our money to help the hungry or the homeless, or to drill wells for water, or help mothers in a crisis pregnancy, and we haven't released that money, even though God is calling us to do so. We may be like Zacchaeus because we owe someone money. Maybe we've taken some money, or cheated someone, or stolen money. Recognize this as a spiritual issue and pray about it. Have a conversation with God just like Zacchaeus did. And in that conversation, look for where you need conversion. And like him, find a way to give back what you've taken. Make restitution on anything you may have stolen. Make all this a part of your response to God's blessings in our lives.